They call it CoffeeScript combined. Take a sip, I know it's quite a trip, 'cause somehow you can write less code but get more done. Yeah! Come on and take a seat, don't end up obsolete. They call it CoffeeScript.
Welcome to level 3 of A Sip of CoffeeScript. In this level, we're going to be walking through conditionals and operators. So conditionals like if, else. Let's jump into it. So an if statement in JavaScript looks something like this. How would we write it in CoffeeScript? Well, as you can imagine, the curly braces are going to go away. It's going to look something like this. The parentheses, of course, are optional. We could also write this in a single line if we wanted to. Alert underage if age less than 18. We can write this another way in CoffeeScript using then. We can say if age less than 18, then alert underage. What about using else? Well, in JavaScript, it's going to look something like this. In CoffeeScript, well, it's just not going to have the parentheses. So something like this. We can also write it using the longer syntax. If age less than 18, then alert underage, else alert of age. It's worth noting that CoffeeScript doesn't have any ternary operators, so you're not going to be able to use question mark or colon anywhere. You're really encouraged to be a little more verbose. Next up, let's take a look at the different operators and what the CoffeeScript translates to in JavaScript. So if you have equals equals or is in CoffeeScript, that's going to translate to equals 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 in JavaScript. It's just a safer way to do equality. Not equals or isn't is going to be not equals equals. Not is just going to be exclamation point, and is going to be ampersand ampersand, or is going to translate to pipe pipe. True, yes, or on is going to translate to true, and false, no, or off is going to translate to false. Let's take a look at some of these in action. Here we have if paid and coffee is on, then pour. So here you can see that is on part is checking the truthiness. So let's take a look at the JavaScript here. Next up, we might say add caffeine if not decaf. That's one way we could write it. Also in CoffeeScript, we could write this as add caffeine unless decaf. Another cool feature of CoffeeScript is the ability to do chained comparisons. So whereas you would have something like this in JavaScript, you can rewrite that in CoffeeScript like so, all chained together. Next up, switch statements. Here's how you might implement a switch statement in JavaScript. It's kind of verbose, isn't it? Well, here's what it looks like in CoffeeScript. So you can see here, it's much nicer, much more readable, much more maintainable, and dare I say, beautiful. Lastly, we're going to talk about existential operators. Existential, meaning checking to see if something exists or not. So, for example, how do we check to see that cups of coffee isn't defined and it isn't equal to null? Well, in JavaScript, we would do something that looks like this, right? In CoffeeScript, we have a better way of writing that. We could write if cups of coffee question mark alert it exists. Much nicer. So we're just using that question mark. These two lines are pretty much the same, or really the CoffeeScript compiles into that JavaScript. We could also write this on a single line if we wanted to, just by writing alert it exists if cups of coffee. What about when you want to set a variable to a default value if it hasn't been set yet, if it's null or it hasn't been defined yet? Well, with the knowledge we have so far, you could do it like this, or if you wanted to, you could do it in a single line. However, there's an even better way to do this in CoffeeScript. You can simply do cups of coffee question mark equals 0. So if it isn't defined or if it's equal to null, it's going to set it to 0. What if we want to call a function on an object only if that object exists? For example, call brew on coffee pot only if it exists. Well, with the knowledge again that we have so far, we could write it like this, but CoffeeScript has a better way to do it. We can simply write coffee pot question mark brew. That's all there is to it. This existential operator also works on functions. So if you want to call a function only if it exists on an object, well, you do it like this. So here we have vehicle.startEngine. It's only going to call that startEngine function if that function exists on vehicle. Then it's only going to call the shiftGear function if the shiftGear function exists on whatever gets returned from startEngine. If you're familiar with the try function in Ruby, in the Ruby programming language, this kind of functions like try. So it's going to try to run this function only if this function exists. Now, you don't want to overuse that existential operator here, especially with regards to this function here. It can be considered a bad code smell, just so you know. Don't want to overuse it. But that brings us to the end of level 3. So now it's time to get your hands dirty in some of the challenges.